Many were disappointed, but the great day was coming, the day of new causes, new prophets, new hope. Wheat will win the war. Plant wheat. Plant the cattle ranges. Plant your vacant lots. Plant wheat. Wheat for the boys over there. Wheat for the Allies. Wheat for the British. Wheat for the Belgians. Wheat for the French. Wheat at any price. Wheat will win the war. Blues. Then we reaped the golden harvest. Then we really plowed the plains. We fumed under millions of new acres for war wheat. We had the manpower. We invented new machinery. The world was our market. By 1933, the old grasslands had become the new wheat lands. 100 million acres. 200 million acres, more wheat.
California's agriculture also started with wheat, but it's quickly bloomed from there, taking full advantage of the climate, the soil, the farm worker labor, and the pumped water. California is now a formidable cornucopia of fruits, vegetables, and nuts. While California's Central Valley accounts for 1% of U.S. farmland, it produces 1/4 of the nation's food. And the variety is staggering. It produces 99% or more of all the country's almonds, raisins, olives, pistachios, pomegranates, and walnuts. It is a leading national producer of carrots, celery, garlic, lemons, lettuce, limes, melons, spinach, and the list goes on. So part of what you're eating tonight was definitely grown in the Central Valley of California. And just as the Midwest produced wheat for the Allies, the British, and the French, California's crops are being loaded onto ships and trains and planes and traveling across the world to places like Japan, China, Mexico, and the Middle East.
Drought. A country without rivers, without streams, with little rain. Once again, the rains held off and the sun baked the earth. This time, no grass held moisture against the winds. And the sun, this time, millions of acres of plowed land lay open to the sun.
Drought is nothing new to California. Tree ring studies show us that in the past there have been mega droughts, droughts that lasted for 20, 50 years throughout the area. And California's water comes mainly from the form of snow and the Sierra Mountains, and through a small number of North Pacific winter storms. Often the yearly precipitation total for the entire state is provided in 5 to 15 days of rain. And droughts are a lot more than just a lack of rainfall. There are many different definitions of drought. You can have a meteorological drought, a socioeconomic drought. It can be defined through soil moisture. There's a lot of different ways to define drought. But ultimately, drought occurs when there's not enough water to meet the demands of both the environment and society. So there's that word society. Drought is a social event. And while drought has been well studied in regions where it takes a big toll on human life through famines, the human dimensions of drought in developed countries remains vastly understudied. So my research is on the human dimensions of drought. And I am especially interested in drought narratives. What are the stories that we are telling about drought? As droughts are social events, and these stories that we tell reveal how we relate to the environment around us and how we socially construct drought vulnerability. So for my research, I'm spending time in Central Valley and talking to a wide group of people on the impacts of drought on agricultural communities. Some of the people I've interviewed include immigrant women from Central America who are living in a small, tiny room at the back of a garage and are sending money back to their families in El Salvador for their 3, 4, 5 children. I've also interviewed farmers, like a third-generation almond farmer who's worried about bank loans and whether he would be able to have a farm to pass down to his children. I've also talked to a lot of social justice activists, like one particular man who came to the US with his family from Mexico, worked in the fields as a child and as a teenager, went to college, and is now an environmental activist trying to ensure that his community has clean water to drink.
Devastation, baked out, blown out, and broke. Year in, year out, uncomplaining, they fought the worst drought in history. Their stock choked to death on the barren land. Their homes were nightmares of swirling dust night and day. Many went ahead of it, but many stayed until stock, machinery, homes, credit, food, and even hope were gone. On to the west. Once again, they headed for the setting sun. Once again, they headed west. Last year, in every summer month, 50,000 people left the Great Plains and hit the highways for the Pacific coast, the last border. Blown out, baked out, and broke. Nothing to stay for, nothing to hope for. Homeless, penniless, and bewildered, they joined the great army of the highways. No place to go, and no place to stop. Nothing to eat, nothing to do. Their homes on 4 wheels. Their work, a desperate gamble for a day's labor in the fields along the highways. The price of a sack of beans or a tank of gas. All they ask is a chance to start over and a chance for their children to eat, to have medical care, to have homes again. 50,000 people a month. The Sun and Winds wrote the most tragic chapter in American agriculture.
So, Agricultural production in the Central Valley has actually not decreased that much, despite the severity of the drought. And that is because of groundwater pumping. So a lot of these farmers are still producing, and if you drive along Highway 5 or along Highway 99, you will still see a lot of green fields. Yet the impacts on these communities have been devastating. One of the biggest impacts has to do, a lot of these families are dependent on domestic wells for their water, and these wells have going dry. In the east side of the valley in Tulare County, over 1,800 domestic wells have failed, and those are the only the ones that have been reported to the county. A lot of people, because they're undocumented, are afraid of engaging with the state, and so they do not report it when their wells go dry. There's a 1 to 2 year waiting list to be able to get a new well drilled in your yard. And the community of East Porterville has been featured widely in the news because all of the houses, 2,000 houses, have all domestic wells, and they've all gone dry. So you basically get a water rationing card, and this is it's been for about over a year, and you go and you pick up bottled water for your family. There's no showers. They've set up showers in the community church. I spoke to one woman who told me the children don't want to go to school because they smell, because they don't have a shower, because their clothes are dirty. And it's not only these wells that are going dry, a lot of the communities also in the western side of the valley are dependent on surface water from the Central Valley Project. And the price of water from this area has gone from $300 an acre foot to $1,300 an acre foot. And the irrigation districts wanted to pass on these costs to these farm working communities. So they're seeing their water bills go to $200 to $300 a month. And when you're living on less than $14,000 a year, that's just not very viable. So how do you make a choice between health care and water? Now the state has been helping some of these communities, so there is assistance, but there are a lot of concerns in the area. And jobs are also being affected. A lot of the farmers have been following row crops, and these are the crops that typically, like tomatoes and melons, that are where the jobs are coming from. And so there is some work available still for a lot of these farm workers, but they're having a shorter harvesting season. They're working a lot less hours. They're having to travel 2 to 3 hours a day to get work. A lot of the fruit packing plants are closing down or moving to the other parts of the state. And a lot of the people I've talked to have requested they need assistance to pay water bills, to pay the electric, to pay their heating, rent. They're also moving in with their relatives. So instead of having one family per house, now you've got 2 or 3 families living in the same household. Another issue that's not widely covered is the fact that a lot of the water in the Central Valley is contaminated with nitrates from all the fertilizers. And with the groundwater levels decreasing, the contamination concentration is increasing. So most people will not drink their tap water. They have not drunk their tap water for years because they're so afraid of contamination. So these different impacts come out through these drought narratives, and I'm asking people, to tell me about the drought, why it started, how it's impacting, who's impacting. And I'm basically getting these environmental narratives. And these are the stories that we tell about the environment around us. And in these narratives, we often have a storyline with a cast of actors. We have a hero, a villain, or a victim. And these reveal our cultural approach to environmental problems. And they prioritize what questions we ask of ourselves, of our government, and also shape the solutions offered to solve environmental problems. And through my interviews, I've found 3 narratives that kind of explain the drought in 3 very different ways. And one of them actually comes from the media articles and not necessarily from the people I've talked about. But that is where California agriculture is unnatural. This is an arid area and people shouldn't be planting anything there. Almonds really came out as the villain in this narrative, especially last year. And a lot of people, when I talked about, I say I'd studied the drought in California, they all tell me, oh yeah, it takes a gallon of water to produce 1 almond. And there's an Onion article last year that I thought it was really funny, and it was kind of taking the voice as the almond, and it was saying, I have a great thirst, I'm gonna drink up all the water I'm going to drink everything up until everything is dry. Another narrative that I've encountered is the fish over farms, where drought is actually not a meteorological event, but a regulatory drought. The Endangered Species Act is protecting the salmon and the delta smelt. And the courts ruled throughout the 90s and 2009 that the Central Valley was taking too much water from the rivers and that the fish were endangered for it. And so that they decreased the amount of water that was being sent down through the canals. And since 1995, the contract allocation of water from the north to the Central Valley has decreased from 70 to 40%. And so a lot of the farmers and a lot of the people who live in these communities, that is the reason why there's a drought. It's because people are picking the fish over the people. One person, when I was asking him about the drought, he says, well, what aspect of the drought do you want to address? The natural one or the congressional one? The environmentalists have such a stronghold over everything to do with the state, the politics, water rights, and that has intensified the natural drought. Another person I spoke to, who's a social service provider, said, you know, the drought didn't start 2 or 3 years ago. It started when the courts protected the fish over the farms. And a lot of the people who live in these communities see it as environmentalists discriminating against poor Latino communities. One person told me, no one wants to watch the salmon die off, but we are watching communities die off. Finally, a third narrative I've encountered, I've called the Appalachia of the West. Poverty in the region is deeply entrenched, and it has been so for a long time. Food insecurity among farm workers is 45%. That means the people that are picking our food that we're eating, 45% of them do not have access to food for a healthy life. The Measure for America is a study that looks at median income, education, and health for all the congressional districts across the US. And it ranks California's 21st congressional district, where I've done a lot of my research, as the lowest in the country when it comes to human development. And so when the drought started, it started in a place that's already suffering. But as one person told me, a lot of the conditions that our people are facing, I'm quoting him right now, like not being able to drink their water, or paying too much of their salary for water, having too little to eat, all of these things, communities have been struggling with these for decades. You know, and it's almost ironic that a lot of these agricultural interests are doing a good job of hijacking our community face, of the hardworking immigrant that wants to feed their family and there's no water, no jobs. But even when the rains come back, we're still going to be poor, we're still going to be hungry, and we're still not going to have clean water. And finally, to wrap up this third narrative, these words work with someone who's been helping a lot train a lot of the farm workers into other jobs that are drought affected. And he said, this drought is a cancer. I have been involved in 7 major disaster responses. When we have a freeze, we have an immediate impact. We lose the oranges, and thousands are out of work. When we have a flood, we have an immediate impact. When we have a drought, it is a slow kill. Each year, it is like a cancer rather than a heart attack. When you have a heart attack, it is immediately diagnosed, but cancer goes on and on, killing you undetected.